I almost threw this painting in the trash. And I don't mean this in a dramatic artist way, I mean it genuinely looked bad enough at one point that I thought, yeah, this is dead. The drawing felt off, the paint was clumsy, the colors were muddy, the subject looked like she was made out of wax, and that she was melting. Not good. But for some reason, I decided to keep going. And somehow, after pushing through that ugly stage, it became one of the strongest paintings I've done so far. So in this video, I will explore the 7 things that this painting taught me, as well as the overarching theme that I learned when I was fighting with it. The first lesson was that painting is inherently clumsy. A brush is not a pencil. It doesn't always behave cleanly, it makes marks you didn't ask for, and that's normal. Part of learning to paint is learning not to panic every time the paint does something awkward. Because while oil paint is wet, it's incredibly malleable. You can move it, push it, scrape it, rebuild it, and that directed me towards one of the biggest realizations that I had. At some point, I stopped treating the paint like a drawing and started treating it more like clay. So instead of thinking that I need to draw the perfect shape with this brush stroke, I started thinking this is a chunk of paint and I can carve it. I can push an area, I can pull another, and I can slowly use that to build the form. Oil started making more sense when I stopped asking it to behave like a pencil and I understood that it wanted to be molded like clay. And that also changed how I thought about wet paint. Because for a long time, I wanted oil paint to dry faster. I kept thinking, once this dries, I can lay over it. Once this dries, I can fix it. And yes, sometimes that's useful. You can let a painting dry and come back to it later. You can use mediums and build in layers. That is a completely valid way to paint. But this painting made me understand why oil staying wet is actually one of its greatest strengths. When the paint is wet, you can mix on the surface, you can adjust subtle temperature changes, shift values, lose an edge, find an edge, carve a shape. But when it starts to gum up, it becomes much harder to manipulate and the paint starts resisting you. It doesn't accept new paint cleanly. You end up doing double the work. You remix, paint over dead areas, you try to revive things that would have been much easier to correct while the paint was still wet. So the lesson here is treat paint as clay and embrace the fact that it's wet and moldable. Another thing this painting taught me is that the perfect brushstroke look sometimes is an illusion. When you look at a good painting, it can seem like the artist just hit that exact shape with one beautiful stroke. And yes, with enough skill, that becomes more possible. But for me, a lot of this painting was a dogfight. I would put down the stroke, hate it, push it, carve it, wipe it off, try again, and slowly fight my way around towards the shape that I wanted. So the final mark might look simple, but the path to get there was not simple. And that's important because when you're learning, you can get discouraged by the idea that every stroke has to be perfect immediately, and it doesn't. Sometimes the stroke is found through the fight. But at the same time, you also have to let the paint do its thing. There were moments where the paint flowed in a way I didn't plan, a color mixed in a way I didn't anticipate, a design was created in a way that I did not choose, and some of these accidents were better than what I intended. So there's a balance. You fight for control, but you also have to stay loose enough to recognize when the paint gives you something. This painting was also done with the Zorn palette, which is 4 simple colors: titanium white, ivory black, cad red light, and yellow ochre. And because the palette is limited, the colors tend to harmonize with each other even when I make mistakes. And that allowed me to think more about relationships: warm against cool, saturated against gray, light against dark. So I learned that by limiting a palette, it opens up opportunities for you to discover and work on other things. By giving yourself more constraints, it allows you to open up other areas. Another lesson was that the reference is not the master. There was a shadow on the right side of the subject's face from a strand of hair, and in the painting it felt distracting. It may have existed in the reference, but it didn't serve the painting, so I removed it because it felt more harmonious with the overall color feel of the painting. So that's something that I'm trying to remember more, is that you're not a slave to the reference. Jeff Watts, whom I consider to be a mentor, says that painting is part what you see, part what you know, and part what you wish you saw. The flowers were also originally yellow, but I shifted them towards a pink. That doesn't mean that you invent randomly, especially with a portrait where the likeness matters. Structure still matters, the person still has to feel believable. But even in a situation like this, you're still making choices. You can simplify, you can remove distractions, you can idealize, you can paint the person in their best light. The reference gives you the information, but the painting has to become its own thing. It has to become your thing. Another thing I learned was that painting is not just about making every part accurate in isolation. It's about controlling relationships. If an edge in the reference is soft, I don't necessarily have to copy that softness exactly. I can push it, make it softer. I can even blow it completely out. And when I do that, the indicated areas suddenly feel more rendered by comparison. And you can achieve the illusion of detail without a lot of detail. The same principle of relationships applies to value, color, and composition. Soft against sharp, warm against cool, saturated against gray, simple against complex. It's all about playing with relationships. And honestly, the fact that I almost gave up on this one makes me like it more. Because the overarching thing that this painting taught me while I was fighting with it was that the ugly stage is not always a sign that the painting is dead. Sometimes it's just the stage where you haven't understood what the painting needs yet. So if you're painting and it starts looking terrible, don't immediately assume it's over. Step back, scrape something, push something, rebuild. Let the paint stay alive, because sometimes the painting you almost threw away is the one that teaches you the most.